Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, Senior A English, and we are now studying in our study of Shakespeare's Sonnet, Sonnet 60. I'm with you on page 375. Now, very much like Sonnet 12, Sonnet 60 is going to pick up on this notion of the passing of time and the ways in which time has to be understood as ubiquitous, always there, always present. Let's take a look at this poem. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end, each changing place with that which goes before, in sequent toil all forwards to contend. Nativity once in the main of light, crawls to maturity, wherewith, being crowned, crooked eclipses against his glory fight, and time that gave doth now his gift confound. Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels in beauty's brow, feeds on the rarities of nature's truth, and nothing stands but for his scythe to mow. And yet, to times in hope my verse shall stand, praising thy worth, despite his cruel hand. Now, of course, right away, just because we're summarizing again and preparing to write our own sonnet, let's make sure we identify 14 lines of iambic pentameter, like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. That ba-bum is an iambic foot, 5 of those pentameter. Notice shore before, end, contend. Notice the interesting sight rhyme, although it's possible that the pronunciation would have worked in Shakespeare's day, at line 10 and at line 12 of brow and mow, right? Because both of those words, O-W, right, end in O-W. So we have a sonnet, no question. But now let's play the game of an extended simile of a kind. And of course, it's one of the famous similes. How can you describe the passing of time? One way poets like to do it is the water, the ocean, the waves, if you will. So we'll begin with that simile. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. In other words, your life is kind of like a wave that's coming, crests, hits the shore, and then is gone. Each changing place with that which goes before. In other words, there were waves before this, before your wave, there will be waves after you. In sequent toil, all forwards do contend. In other words, yes, life does seem to be about going forward, but only for a period of time. You exist, but not for long. Again, you ain't met no 200-year-old people. Many have argued that our entire time together, all the stories, both poems and others that we share, are somehow intended to help remind us of this fact that we are a wave that's breaking on a pebbled shore, but not for long, not for long. He says it, nativity, early birth, once in the main of light, crawls to maturity. Well, that's a great word picture, right? Wherewith being crowned, and if you're wanting the extended metaphor of the wave, of course, the crowning, crooked eclipses against his glory fight in time, notice it's capitalized, that gave doth now his gift confound. In other words, stunningly beautiful. You know, it's like my daughter Ash. She used to say to her grandma, when she'd see a picture of her grandma when her grandma was younger, "Grandma, when you were young, you were hot." Well, what actually is, of course, she's saying to her grandma, now you're but ugly, back then you were young and beautiful. Of course, my Ash someday will have her son say the same thing to her. Won't he? He'll be like, "Ma, what's going on?" This is the nature of time, right? Time doth transfix. And notice it's useful to have your footnote here. Transfix here, impale, like a sword or a lance sticking through. That's what the word transfix actually means. Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels in beauty's brow, feeds on the rarities of nature's truth, and nothing stands but for his scythe to mow. In other words, Again, as we said when we were discussing Sonnet 12, go into any gym, walk up to all those amazingly beautiful, healthy bodies, and ask them, what will that body look like in 100 years? Well, of course, in 100 years, it isn't going to be an alive body, is it? It's going to be a decayed body, right? No matter how hard you work at it, age is going to catch up to you. And ultimately, this is the nature of time and of aging. Okay? And yet, a bit of hope maybe at the end of this poem. So that way it's not a complete sad poem. And yet, to times in hope, my verse shall stand. In other words, the artist passes, but the art remains. Now we're going to have this debate over and over again after Shakespeare. We're going to play the game through Milton. We're definitely going to play the game through T.S. Eliot. We're going to ask this question over and over again about, can the artist outlive? Possibly the very greatest of this is W.B. Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium. We will get there later as we study together. And yet to times in hope my verse shall stand, praising thy worth, despite his cruel hand. In other words, he says, I'm writing poems about you. I hope that these lines will last, and in the process, I hope that I can somehow transcend time, and that you can also transcend time, because obviously the beautiful body that you now possess will someday no longer be a beautiful body. Let's jump really quickly to 3a and obviously make some connections between Sonnet 60 and Sonnet 12, all right? We've mentioned Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium as another poem that we can, a text that we can write down. Finally, at 3b, the question of Sonnet 60, what are your thoughts about getting older? It's funny, when we're younger, we're so excited to get older. And then once you get older, you start to wish. It's like often seniors will say, man, it'd be interesting and fun maybe to just go back and have high school over, knowing what I know now. And of course, some will say, no, that's the worst imaginable thing. But of course, either way, you can't go back, can you? You can't go back. Life is always like that wave about going forward towards the pebbled shore. How do you deal with that? How do you live with that? And finally, another question. How can you transcend time if you're an artist, leaving behind works of art? Do you think that actually works? When we study Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, another title that you can write down in 3a, we'll come back to Sonnet 60 and we'll make some observations about how Keats, a great lover of Shakespeare, is playing around with this notion that art is amazing because it transcends the artist, and to some degree, art then is more important, more valuable than the very artist who created it. Well, there you go, Shakespeare's Sonnet 60 and the whole notion of waves on a shore. Thank you.